It was 8:47 on a quiet Saturday night in suburban Portland, and the silence in my new house was louder than any traffic hum out on the main road. I stood centered in my dining room, barefoot on the brand new hardwood floor I'd spent 3 weekends sanding and sealing myself, and stared at the scene I'd replayed in my head 1,000 times over 10 years. The oak dining table I'd saved for 2 full years was set for 5. White ceramic plates, polished silverware, folded linen napkins, all arranged perfectly. A roasted chicken sat centered on a ceramic platter, its skin crisp and golden an hour ago, now cooling, the juices congealing slow and dull along the edges. Across the room, thin silver balloons clung weakly to the wall, spelling out the word, home. Their once tight shine had deflated with the passing hours, just like my hope. I'd moved into this house 3 days prior. Not a rental, not a condo, not a temporary fix. Mine. A 3-bedroom single-family home with a fenced backyard, a sunlit kitchen, and a quiet street where the neighbors wave when you walk by. It was the reward for a decade of choosing nothing over everything. No annual vacations, no spontaneous weekend trips with friends, no fancy dinners or retail splurges, just overtime shifts, back-to-back client projects, strict monthly budgets, and endless nights working until my eyes burned, all to build something stable for myself, something no one could take away. I'd built this home from scratch, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, sacrifice by sacrifice, and I'd wanted my family to see it, to see me. I'd texted them all week, confirming the housewarming dinner. My parents, my brother Liam, the 4 of us plus me, 5 seats at the table. I'd told them how much this moment meant, how long I'd waited, how hard I'd fought. I'd baked my grandmother's lemon tart, the recipe she'd taught me when I was 13, the one she'd said tasted like hope and new beginnings, spending 3 hours zesting lemons, stirring custard, pressing the crust until my wrists ached. I'd wanted to carry a piece of her into this new chapter, to tie my biggest achievement to the only family warmth I'd ever truly known. I'd pictured my mother smiling, my dad clapping me on the shoulder, Liam telling me I'd finally made it. I'd imagined celebration, pride, love, the kind every kid craves, even well into adulthood. They were supposed to arrive at 7 o'clock. It was now nearly 9. An hour and 47 minutes of waiting, of checking my phone, of telling myself they were just running late, that traffic was bad, that something minor had held them up. An hour and 47 minutes of clinging to the last fragile thread of my lifelong hope, that if I achieved enough, if I worked hard enough, if I proved my worth, my family would finally love me out loud. My phone face up on the counter buzzed once, soft and sharp, cutting through the stillness. I'd refreshed my messages so many times the screen had gone dim hours before, but I still lunged for it, my chest tightening like it always does when I'm waiting for them to choose me. The text was from my mom. 5 words, no punctuation, no warmth, no follow-up. Sorry, something came up. Busy tonight. That was it. No apology for breaking my heart. No acknowledgement of the dinner I'd spent all day cooking. No mention of the house I'd spent 10 years building. No pride, no curiosity, no I'm proud of you. Just a dismissive brush-off, like my biggest life milestone was a trivial inconvenience. A second text popped up right below it, from my dad. Shorter, heavier, infinitely more ominous. We need to talk about the house. No congratulations. No excitement. No joy for the daughter who dragged herself out of struggle to build a better life. Just a demand. A warning. A quiet signal that they weren't here to celebrate my win. They were here to evaluate it, to weigh it, to figure out how it benefited them. For a long minute, I just stared at those 2 messages. I waited for the sadness to hit me. The familiar, aching grief I'd carried my whole life. The sadness that makes you cry in the shower, that makes you overwork yourself to prove you're worthy, that makes you beg for crumbs of attention from people who hold your whole heart. But it didn't come. There was no burning throat, no stinging eyes, no hollow ache of longing. All I felt was a cold, clean, final kind of quiet. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was done. Sadness wants fixing. Sadness wants an apology, a do-over, a chance to make things better. Done is different. Done is a door clicking shut. Done is a lock turning into place, slow and irreversible. A sound so subtle you almost miss it, yet it rewrites every future moment that comes after. 10 years of overtime, 10 years of sacrifice, 10 years of dreaming of being seen, and they couldn't even show up. Couldn't even spare one evening to honor the hardest, proudest thing I'd ever done. I flipped my phone face down on the quartz countertop, muffling the screen's faint glow. My gaze drifted to the lemon tart sitting on the marble board, perfect and golden, dusted with powdered sugar, filled with the bright, sweet tart flavor of my grandmother's legacy. 13-year-old me had baked this tart hoping to make my family happy. 34-year-old me finally understood that some people would never be happy for me, no matter how much I gave. I picked up the whole pastry in both hands, walked to the stainless steel trash can by the kitchen island, and dropped it in. The heavy, dull thud it made when it hit the bottom was the most honest sound I'd heard all night. I didn't cry. I didn't sigh. I just stood there, listening to the house settle around me, the quiet creaks of new wood, the distant rush of a neighbor's sprinkler, the faint hum of my refrigerator. This was my home, mine, not a space built for their approval, not a gift to earn their love, not a milestone to impress them, just mine. I'd spent a decade building a life worthy of celebration, and if they couldn't celebrate it with me, they didn't get to be part of it at all. I crossed the dining room and pulled out one of the empty wooden chairs. Sitting down alone at the table set for 5. The cold roast chicken sat untouched in front of me, the deflated silver balloons sagging against the wall behind the empty seats. For years, I'd kept every family photo in my phone album. Childhood birthdays, holiday gatherings, blurry, candid shots of us pretending to be close. I opened the gallery now, scrolling past every smiling fake memory, and selected every single picture of my parents and Liam. One by one, I deleted them. No hesitation, no regret, no lingering hope that things would magically change. I erased the visual proof of a family that had only ever existed in my head. My phone buzzed again minutes later, breaking the thick, calm silence I'd settled into. I flipped it over, half expecting a half-hearted apology, a last-minute excuse, a sliver of the validation I'd spent my whole life chasing. Instead, it was my dad's name lighting up the screen, a new text waiting for me. "We'll be over tomorrow morning. Don't make other plans." No question, no courtesy, just a command. They still thought they got to show up unannounced, unapologetic, and take whatever they wanted from the life I'd built alone. And in that moment, I knew tomorrow would be the day I finally stopped letting them. The next morning arrived gray and damp, Pacific Northwest rain streaking down my living room windows and softening the edges of the neighborhood rooftops. I woke earlier than I needed to, my body still conditioned to years of early client deadlines, but instead of reaching for my laptop, I made coffee. Black, no sugar, the way I only drink it on days I know I'll need steady hands and a steadier head. I'd slept surprisingly well after deleting those family photos. No restless tossing, no looping what-if conversations. For the first time in a long while, my mind wasn't busy trying to fix people who didn't want to be fixed. I'd cleaned up the dining room last night too. Bagged the cold chicken, wiped down the table, peeled the deflated silver balloons off the wall, and tossed them into the recycling bin. I left the 5 placemats stacked neatly in a drawer. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just prepared. My dad's text lingered in my messages like a scheduled appointment. I had no choice but to keep. "We'll be over tomorrow morning. Don't make other plans." The arrogance of it still sat heavy in my chest. The assumption that my time, my home, my hard-won peace belonged to them to interrupt whenever they pleased. They showed up at 10 a.m. Exactly. No text ahead of time. No knock warning me. Just the loud rumble of my dad's old pickup truck pulling into my driveway. Tires crunching on the fresh gravel I'd paid to have laid last month. I watched from the front window as they piled out. My dad in his faded work flannel. My mom in her usual neutral sweater and slacks. Liam trailing behind them with his hood up, hands stuffed in his pockets, looking like he was along for a ride rather than about to confront me over my own house. I unlocked the front door and stepped back, letting them walk in without a greeting. I didn't smile. I didn't offer water or coffee. I simply closed the door behind them and leaned against the entryway wall, waiting. My dad's eyes scanned the room immediately, roaming over my hardwood floors, my new couch, my built-in bookshelves, the fresh paint on the walls. He wasn't admiring it. He was appraising it, calculating its value, tallying up what he thought the family was owed. "Nice place," he said flatly, no warmth in his voice. It sounded less like a compliment and more like an opening bid. My mom wandered past me into the living room, running a finger along the edge of the mantel, like she was inspecting a rental property for damage. Liam hovered awkwardly by the door, avoiding my eyes entirely. "You didn't answer your texts last night?" my mom said, turning to face me with that familiar, passive-aggressive tone she'd used my entire childhood, the one that framed my boundaries as rudeness. We waited around wondering what was wrong. I blinked at her, calm and unflinching. "You didn't show up to my housewarming. You sent a 5-word excuse and never called." "I didn't have anything to say," my dad huffed, crossing his arms over his chest. "We had a family emergency. You think the world stops for your little party?" The words landed exactly how they always had, dismissive, minimizing, determined to make my milestone small so their neglect wouldn't have to matter. But this time I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize for wanting to be celebrated. I just tilted my head and waited for the real reason they were here. I didn't have to wait long. My dad gestured around the room, his tone firm and entitled. "Look, we didn't come here to fight. We came to talk straight. Liam's situation fell apart last month. His lease ended, his roommate bailed, and he's got nowhere to go. He's been crashing on friends' couches, and it's not sustainable." My gaze flicked to my brother, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. I knew Liam struggled with consistency. I knew he bounced between jobs and apartments, that he avoided responsibility whenever possible. What I didn't know was why any of that was my problem. "Okay, I said simply. I'm sorry he's going through that. My mom stepped forward, her voice soft but insistent, the guilt-tripping tone I knew better than my own reflection creeping in. It's not just a temporary issue, Alara. He needs stability. He needs a real place to land. And you have so much space here. 3 bedrooms all to yourself. It would only be for a little while. Just until he gets back on his feet. I felt my jaw tighten, the last lingering thread of my childhood hope fraying completely. This was why they'd skipped my housewarming. This was the emergency. Not a sickness, not a crisis, not something unforeseen. They'd been busy planning how to move my brother into the home I'd built entirely alone. 10 years of sacrifice, 10 years of skipped vacations and late nights and brutal budgeting, and they saw nothing but empty space to occupy. You want him to move in here? I said, stating it plainly, no emotion in my voice. My dad nodded like it was already settled fact. Rent-free. Family doesn't charge family. You've been blessed with this opportunity, and it's your job to share it. We raised you. We supported you. Now you support your brother. The phrase "we supported you" hung in the air like a lie I'd spent my whole life swallowing. They'd supported my existence, yes. They'd paid for my childhood roof and meals, but they'd never supported my dreams, my independence, my right to live for myself. They'd never stayed up late helping me with college apps, never cheered for my promotions, never asked how I'd survived the hard years alone. But now that I'd succeeded, suddenly they were ready to claim ownership of my outcome. I looked at Liam, finally meeting his eyes. What do you want? I asked him directly. He shrugged, uncomfortable and avoidant. It'd be helpful. I don't have any other options right now. No accountability. No plan. No gratitude. Just expectation. Exactly how it had always been. I was the older sister. The responsible one. The one who sacrificed so the family could stay comfortable. My mom spoke again, her voice sharp with quiet warning now that she sensed hesitation from me. Family shares everything, Alara. You wouldn't turn your own brother away when he's down on his luck, would you? That would be selfish, cold. No good family does that. Her words settled over me like a weight, the same guilt I'd carried for decades pressing down once more. But this time I didn't bend. I stood firm in my own home, surrounded by the proof of my own hard work, and realized their version of family was just one-sided sacrifice. Always mine, never theirs. As I watched them stare at me, waiting for my automatic compliance, I knew this casual demand was only the start. If I gave in now, they would never stop taking. Her words settled over me like a weight, the same guilt I'd carried for decades pressing down once more. But this time I didn't bend. I stood firm in my own home, surrounded by the proof of my own hard work, and realized their version of family was just one-sided sacrifice. Always mine, never theirs. As I watched them stare at me, waiting for my automatic compliance, I knew this casual demand was only the start. If I gave in now, they would never stop taking. The room went quiet after my mom spoke, thick and expectant, like everyone was waiting for me to fold the way I always had. For me to smile, agree, apologize for even hesitating, and hand over half my new life to fix my brother's mistakes. But I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I stood my ground in the middle of my living room and drew the first hard boundary I'd ever dared to draw with my family. No, I said clearly, steadily. No room for negotiation in my tone. Liam is not moving in here. The 3 of them froze in place, like no one had ever told them no before. My dad's face hardened instantly, his jaw tightening, his shoulders squaring off like he was preparing for a fight. My mom's eyes widened, hurt and outraged in one breath, like I'd personally betrayed every value they'd ever forced me to uphold. Liam's head snapped up, surprised and offended, like he'd assumed my help was guaranteed. Excuse me? My dad bit out, his voice dropping low and dangerous, the tone he used when I was a kid and dared to question his rules. I didn't back down. I held his gaze and repeated myself, slower this time, intentional with every word. I said no. This house is mine. I worked for it. I sacrificed for it. I don't owe anyone free housing, especially not someone who's never once lifted a finger for me. That's incredibly selfish, Alara. My mom cut in immediately, her voice rising with suppressed fury. This is family. Family doesn't say no when someone needs help. You think you're better than us now that you have a nice house? You think you get to shut your own blood out? I've spent my whole life helping, I replied, the quiet exhaustion of decades finally spilling into my voice. I've helped financially when your car broke down. I've helped Liam cover his rent when he overspent. I've listened to every complaint, showed up for every holiday, apologized every time I accidentally put my own needs first. And not once has anyone shown up for me. Not last night. Not ever. My dad stepped forward, invading my personal space, his voice loud and sharp. This is ungrateful. You think you built this life out of thin air? We raised you. We gave you the foundation to succeed. You owe us loyalty. You owe your brother loyalty. Loyalty goes both ways, I said firmly. Loyalty doesn't mean I ruin my peace to clean up his repeated mistakes. Loyalty doesn't mean you skip my biggest milestone and then show up the next day to take what you want. Liam finally spoke up, defensive and bitter. I'm not asking for forever, just a few months. You have extra rooms. It's not that big of a deal for you. It is a big deal for me, I told him. This house is my safe space. It's the first thing I've ever built solely for myself. I'm not sharing it with someone who expects me to fix his life for free. The argument escalated fast after that, my family firing off every guilt trip and manipulation tactic they'd perfected over my lifetime. They called me cold, arrogant, unfeeling, spoiled by success. They reminded me of every small favor they'd ever done for me 20 years ago, while ignoring every large sacrifice I'd made for them as an adult. They painted my boundary as a moral failure, not an act of self-preservation. I let them talk. I let them rage. I didn't scream back. I didn't cry. I just stood there and absorbed every harsh word, finally recognizing it for what it was. Desperation. They weren't upset about Liam's housing crisis. They were upset I'd stopped being their reliable safety net. They were upset I'd grown boundaries they could no longer exploit. When they finally ran out of steam, my mom shook her head, her voice thick with performative disappointment. I can't believe you're doing this. After everything we've done for you, you don't get to take credit for my hard work, I said quietly. Not anymore. My dad stared at me for a long, tense moment, his eyes blazing with anger and something else, resentment, sharp and unmasked. You think this is over? He said finally. You think you can just cut your family off because you have a nice house now? This house isn't only yours, Alara. Not while you still have family in this town. The words sent a cold prickle down my spine, a quiet warning hidden in his threat. Before I could push him to explain what he meant, he turned and stormed toward the door. My mom followed, shooting me one last disappointed look, and Liam trailed after them, silent and sullen. The front door slammed shut hard enough to rattle the windows, leaving me alone in my quiet, perfect house once again. My hands shook slightly as I locked the deadbolt, my heart racing not from fear but from the sheer weight of what I'd just done. I'd never stood up to them like that. I'd never dared to say no and mean it. I'd finally built my first real line of defense, but as I leaned my forehead against the cool wooden door, I knew my family wouldn't let this go easily. Their quiet threat hung in the air, unanswered and dangerous, promising far more trouble ahead. For the next 48 hours I existed in a strange, unsettling limbo. The house was quiet, peaceful in a way it hadn't been during my family's visit, but the calm felt temporary, like the quiet before a storm. I kept replaying my dad's final line in my head, "This house isn't only yours." I told myself I was overreacting, that it was just an angry remark from a humbled man, empty heat from a fight lost. I wanted to believe it was nothing more than petty bitterness. I wanted to believe my family was just hurt and would cool down soon. That was my mistake. I misjudged them completely. I thought their anger was temporary frustration. I didn't realize it was the start of a calculated campaign to break my boundaries and take what they wanted. I heard nothing from them Saturday night or all day Sunday. No calls, no texts, no attempts to argue or apologize. Radio silence. Part of me relaxed, stupidly hopeful that they'd accepted my answer and would back off. I even considered sending a gentle peace text, a watered-down olive branch to smooth over the tension, ready to compromise just a little to keep the family peace I'd always prioritized. I typed and deleted 3 separate messages, terrified of burning bridges entirely. By Monday morning, I woke up to a flurry of unexpected texts from extended family, cousins, aunts, uncles I spoke to only a few times a year. Their messages were short, judgmental, and entirely one-sided. Heard you're refusing to help your brother. Family sticks together. Alara, you're being unreasonable. No wonder your parents are hurt. My stomach dropped as I read them one by one, cold dread settling heavy in my gut. My parents hadn't cooled down. They'd gone behind my back. They'd spent the entire weekend painting me as the villain, spreading a one-sided story to every relative we had, framing me as a selfish, ungrateful daughter who'd abandoned her own blood for material gain. I called my best friend Marnie immediately, my voice tight with disbelief as I told her everything. Marnie was the only person who knew the full truth. How hard I'd worked for the house, how many times I'd bailed my family out, how little they'd ever given back. She didn't hesitate to cut through my guilt. They're manipulating the narrative, she said firmly, her tone sharp and protective. They know they can't win face to face, so they're turning the whole family against you to force you to cave. Don't you dare apologize. Don't you dare backtrack. But everyone's judging me, I told her, my throat tight. All of them think I'm cruel. Let them, Marnie said. Let them be ignorant. You know the truth. Your peace matters more than their misplaced judgment. I wanted to listen to her. I wanted to be strong. But a lifetime of craving familial approval doesn't break overnight. I still hated being the black sheep. I still hated having my name dragged through the family grapevine. Against my better judgment, I decided to attempt one final peace talk. I texted my mom, asking if we could talk calmly, without fighting, without audience. To my surprise, she agreed instantly. I thought it meant they were willing to listen. I thought it meant we could fix the misunderstanding, clear my name, find a middle ground. I was wrong. It was a trap. We met at a small local coffee shop halfway between our houses Tuesday afternoon. Neutral ground I'd hoped would keep the conversation civil. My parents arrived alone. No Liam. And for the first 10 minutes, they were eerily calm, almost kind. They nodded and listened as I explained my burnout, my 10 years of sacrifice, my need for a safe space that was entirely my own. I told them I loved my brother, but I couldn't enable his endless cycle of irresponsibility anymore. Just as I thought we were making progress, my dad dropped the bomb I'd never seen coming. His voice quiet and cold, designed to cut deep. You're being selfish because you think you earned that house alone, but you didn't. You used family money for that down payment. Your grandmother's inheritance. Money that should have stayed in the family, not gone straight to you. I froze mid-sentence, every thought in my head grinding to a halt. My grandmother's inheritance. I'd known about the small sum she'd left me. $20,000, saved up over her lifetime, gifted explicitly to me alone before she passed. I'd used every penny for my house down payment, the final push that let me stop renting and buy my own home. I'd always thought it was a gift, a grandmother's blessing for her hardworking granddaughter. My dad leaned forward, eyes sharp with long-buried resentment I'd never sensed before. We've never said anything because we didn't want to fight, but that money was family property. You took it and bought yourself a fancy house, and now you refuse to share with your own brother? You owe us far more than a spare bedroom, Alara. You owe the family repayment. In that moment, I realized everything I'd thought I knew was wrong. This wasn't about Liam's housing crisis. It had never been about that. This was about years of simmering bitterness, about them resenting me for receiving a gift they believed belonged to them. All the quiet coldness, all the unspoken tension, all the missed celebrations. It had all been building to this. My peaceful attempt at reconciliation had only exposed a far deeper, uglier truth. And now, every extended family member judging me had only heard their version of the story, leaving me completely isolated. I left the coffee shop in a daze, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip my coffee cup. The world felt tilted, every childhood memory shifting and rearranging in my head as I processed my dad's revelation. All those small moments I'd brushed off as typical family friction, the quiet disdain when I succeeded, the refusal to celebrate my wins, the constant pressure to give more than I received, had never been normal family dynamics. They'd been resentment, years and years of it, buried deep beneath surface-level civility. I'd always believed my grandmother's inheritance was a personal gift. She'd pulled me aside months before her passing, her hands frail and wrinkled, and told me she'd saved every dollar for me specifically. For your future, baby, she'd said. For a home no one can take from you. She'd watched me struggle through my 20s, working 3 jobs to stay afloat, sacrificing every joy for stability. She'd wanted me to have something secure, something mine, but my parents had seen it differently. To them, every good thing that happened to me belonged to the family collective. My success wasn't my victory. It was a resource to be divided, shared, and redistributed to my less successful brother. My grandmother's intentional, loving gift had been twisted into a debt I was supposed to repay for the rest of my life. I drove home on autopilot, my mind racing, and texted Marnie immediately to tell her everything. She called me within 30 seconds. Her voice urgent and furious on my behalf. "That's not family money," she said firmly. "It was gifted to you explicitly. Your grandma chose you. Your parents are bitter because she didn't give it to them or split it equally. They've been holding this grudge for years, and only now showed their true colors." Her words cut through my confusion, grounding me in the truth I'd always known deep down. But clarity didn't erase the pain. It only made it sharper. I realized my family had never truly wanted me to succeed. They'd wanted me to succeed for them, to build wealth they could access, to create stability they could leech off of, to be the responsible older sister who fixed every family problem without complaint. That night, Liam texted me out of the blue. No anger, no demands, just a quiet, vulnerable message I'd never expected. "I need to tell you the truth. Mom and Dad have been mad about the inheritance for years. They made me ask to move in, said it was my right as your brother, said you owed me a shot at stability because Grandma left you all that money." My chest ached as I read his words. Liam wasn't just a lazy, irresponsible sibling. He was a pawn. A weapon my parents had used to break down my boundaries, to punish me for receiving a gift they'd wanted for themselves. He'd been pressured, manipulated, and told his failure was my responsibility to fix. I called him, and for the first time in years, we talked honestly, without defensiveness or argument. He admitted he'd known it was unfair. He'd known I'd worked too hard to have my home taken from me, but he'd been desperate, homeless and scared, and our parents had convinced him I was selfish for not sacrificing my peace for his comfort. "They've always favored me, you know," Liam said quietly, shame in his voice. "Not because I'm better, because I need more. You've always been strong enough to handle the loss. They never cared that you lost things too. His words landed like a punch to the gut. That was the core of it. The ugly truth I'd spent 34 years refusing to see. Strength in my family was never rewarded. It was exploited. My resilience, my discipline, my ability to grind through hardship alone had never made them proud. It had made them comfortable taking from me. Again and again and again, Liam's confession unraveled every remaining illusion I'd held about my family. There was no misunderstanding, no temporary fight, no fixable rift. This was a fundamental, permanent divide. They resented my success. They resented my grandmother's gift. They resented my independence. And they would never stop trying to take what I'd built for myself. When I hung up the phone, I walked through my quiet house, running my hand along the smooth hardwood floors, the cool kitchen countertops, the walls I'd painted myself. This home wasn't just a house anymore. It was proof of every sacrifice I'd made, every boundary I'd finally set, every lie I'd finally uncovered. And I knew in that moment that the small war we'd started was only just beginning. My parents wouldn't let go of their grudge easily, and they weren't done punishing me yet. The next 48 hours were the darkest of my adult life. Every illusion I'd clung to about family, loyalty, and unconditional love crumbled completely, leaving nothing but raw, honest truth in its wake. I'd spent my entire life making excuses for them. They were stressed. They were old-fashioned. They didn't know better. They loved me in their own flawed way. But there was no excuse left now. Their resentment was intentional. Their manipulation calculated. Their entitlement unapologetic. After Liam's confession, I'd hoped there might be a sliver of accountability from my parents. I'd hoped they might admit they'd been unfair, that they'd manipulated my brother, that they'd resented me unjustly. Instead, they doubled down harder than ever. My mom texted me a long, passive-aggressive paragraph that boiled down to the same toxic logic. You have more than enough. Your brother has nothing. It's your duty to give. When I replied calmly, explaining that the inheritance was a personal gift and that I would no longer sacrifice my boundaries for their sense of entitlement, my dad sent an ultimatum, cold and final. Choose your family or choose your pride. If you refuse to help Liam, you're choosing to cut us all out. It was the cruelest choice they could offer. Choose the people who loved me conditionally, or keep the life I'd built for myself and be branded the villain forever. For decades I'd have caved. For decades I'd have swallowed my pain, ignored my own needs, and surrendered to keep the family intact. But I wasn't that girl anymore. Still, the weight of the choice crushed me. I spent 2 days alone in my house, barely eating, barely sleeping, replaying every memory of childhood neglect and adult exploitation. I grieved not for the family I had, but for the family I'd always wanted, the one that celebrated me, that protected me, that loved me without demanding sacrifice in return. I grieved the little girl who'd spent her whole life begging for approval she would never get. Worse than the fight itself was the isolation. Most of my extended family had already sided with my parents, buying their one-sided narrative of my selfishness. A few distant relatives texted to check in, but none knew the full story. None dared to contradict my parents publicly. For a while, it felt like the entire world saw me as the bad guy. Only Marnie stood firmly in my corner, steady and unwavering. Even Liam pulled back, overwhelmed by guilt and family pressure. He stopped texting, stopped answering my calls, caught between his parents' demands and the truth he'd finally admitted. For the first time in my life, I was completely alone in a family conflict. No allies, no mediators, no one to validate my pain. I hit my absolute lowest point that Wednesday night. I stood in my perfect, beautiful house, surrounded by everything I'd worked for, and felt emptier than I'd ever felt in my tiny old rental apartment. Success felt hollow when it cost you your family. Boundaries felt cruel when everyone around you called them selfish. I questioned if I was wrong, if I was truly ungrateful, if I'd ruined everything over pride. I sat on my living room floor until midnight, staring at the empty space beside me, and finally let myself cry. Not for the house, not for the fight, but for 34 years of unmet longing. 34 years of trying and failing to earn love that was never mine to earn. By Thursday morning, the tears stopped. The grief didn't disappear, but it hardened into resolve. I realized I wasn't losing my family. I was finally freeing myself from a toxic cycle that had drained me my entire life. If loving me required me to give up every good thing I'd built, then their love was never worth having. I woke up to one final ultimatum text from my mom. Cold and unyielding. You have 48 hours to change your mind. Let Liam move in, or you lose this family entirely. I stared at the words for a long time, no longer afraid. I'd already lost the family I'd always wanted. All that was left was the toxic version I no longer needed. And I knew, beyond any doubt, that I would never surrender my home, my peace, or my self-respect to get it back. I stopped reacting that day. I stopped crying, stopped overthinking, stopped hoping for a last-minute change of heart from my family. Emotion had gotten me nowhere. Guilt had only made me smaller. Fear had kept me trapped for decades. It was time to stop fighting with my heart and start acting with my head. I texted Marnie first, telling her about the 48-hour ultimatum. She was at my house within an hour, coffee in hand, calm and practical as ever. She didn't tell me to forgive them. She didn't tell me to smooth things over. She sat me down at my kitchen table and helped me build a strategy. "They're attacking your character to force compliance," she said, spreading out a notebook on my counter. "Emotion is their weapon. Guilt is their tool. You beat them by removing both. No more emotional arguments. No more defensive explanations. Just facts, boundaries, and proof." We spent the afternoon compiling every piece of evidence I had to ground my truth. I pulled up my grandmother's old handwritten letter, explicitly stating the inheritance was for my personal home purchase alone. I gathered bank records dating back 10 years, proof of my consistent overtime hours, client payments, and strict budgeting, proof every dollar of my home was earned by my own hands. I pulled text records from years past, showing every time I'd financially supported my family, every time I'd bailed Liam out of trouble, every time I'd prioritized their needs over mine. For the first time, I saw the full picture laid out in black and white. I had given endlessly. They had taken endlessly. My success was not luck. It was not unearned. It was the result of a decade of relentless sacrifice. And my grandmother's gift was the final, well-deserved reward for every hard day I'd pushed through alone. Armed with proof, I let go of every last shred of guilt. My family's manipulation worked only as long as I believed their lies. Now I knew better. I knew I wasn't selfish. I wasn't ungrateful. I was finally choosing myself after a lifetime of choosing them. I also set firm, non-negotiable boundaries for the first time in my life. I turned off message notifications for their numbers. I stopped checking family group chats. I refused to engage with passive-aggressive comments or judgmental texts from extended relatives. I no longer allowed their voices to occupy space in my head. Where I'd once been desperate for compromise, I now saw compromise for what it was: surrender. There was no middle ground here. Either my boundaries were respected, or my family got to continue exploiting me. I chose myself. As the 48-hour deadline ticked down, my family grew increasingly frantic. My parents sent multiple long texts, alternating between fake kindness and vicious anger, trying to break my resolve. Liam sent a hesitant message, apologizing for his role in their manipulation but begging me to understand his fear of being homeless. I responded to him gently but firmly, telling him I was sorry for his struggle, but could not fix his life for him. By the end of the second day, their emotional tactics failed completely. I didn't bend. I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. Their guilt trips fell flat against my solid, unwavering boundaries. For the first time in our entire relationship, they had no power over me. When the deadline hit, I typed out one final definitive text to my parents. No anger, no bitterness, no regret, just quiet, unshakable truth. I've made my decision. Liam will not be moving into my home. This house is mine, built by my work and gifted to me by Grandma. I will no longer sacrifice my peace for your sense of entitlement. This conversation is over. I sent the message and locked my phone. The dynamic had shifted entirely. For years, they'd held all the power through guilt and family obligation. Now the power was mine, and I knew their desperate, panicked reaction was only the beginning of their fall from control. My family's world unraveled the second I sent that final text. Stripped of their ability to guilt-trip me into compliance, they had nowhere left to turn but escalation. Without my boundaries to push against, their only remaining tactic was to destroy my reputation entirely, hoping public judgment would force me to cave where emotional manipulation had failed. They began calling every family member, every old family friend, every distant acquaintance they could think of, spinning an even more vicious version of their lie. This time they didn't just say I was selfish. They claimed I'd stolen the inheritance outright, that I'd manipulated my grandmother into giving me money meant for the whole family, that I'd abandoned my struggling brother out of pure greed. They painted me as cruel, dishonest, and unworthy of any family connection. For 24 hours, I watched the messages roll in, cold, disappointed, accusatory texts from people I'd known my whole life. It stung, but it no longer broke me. I'd already grieved the loss of their approval. I'd already accepted that choosing myself meant letting go of the family's false version of me. Marnie helped me navigate every interaction, reminding me I didn't owe anyone a detailed defense. Still, I chose to send a single, factual explanation to every extended family member who reached out. I attached my grandmother's letter, redacted private bank details, but leaving the explicit gift language visible. I shared proof of my decade of sacrifice and past financial support for my family. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply presented the truth and let people choose what to believe. The tide shifted faster than I expected. Several older relatives, my great aunt, a few cousins who'd also struggled with our parents' toxic dynamics, texted me privately to apologize. They admitted they'd heard only my parents' side initially, but the evidence spoke for itself. They recognized my parents' bitterness, saw their manipulation clearly, and acknowledged I'd been treated unfairly. For the first time, I had outside validation. For the first time, people other than Marnie saw the full truth. I wasn't the villain. I was the scapegoat. My parents realized the narrative was slipping out of their control, and it made them desperate. Their lies were unraveling, their public support fading, their power to shame me vanishing entirely. Where they'd once been calm and calculated, they became reckless and unhinged. Liam finally broke free from their pressure entirely, texting me a long, sincere apology. He admitted our parents had spent years poisoning them against me, teaching them to view my success as a personal insult. He said he was tired of being their pawn, tired of resenting me for working hard while he chose complacency. It was a small, fragile reconciliation, but it mattered. It was the first crack in my parents' total control over the family narrative. As their last bits of power crumbled, my dad resorted to the only move he had left: intimidation. He texted me once more, short and furious. "I'm coming over. We're finishing this in person." I didn't reply. I didn't panic. I simply locked my doors, turned on my outdoor security lights, and waited. I was no longer afraid of his anger. I was only ready for the final confrontation. Minutes later, I saw his truck pull into my driveway through my front window. The power had fully reversed now. They were on my territory, fighting my rules, losing control of every part of the conflict they'd started. The final showdown was inevitable, and I was no longer the child waiting to be punished. I was the adult ready to stand my ground. My dad didn't knock. He pounded on my front door hard enough to rattle the frame, sharp, aggressive strikes that echoed through my quiet house. I walked slowly to the entryway, calm and steady, and pulled open the door. He stood on my porch, face flushed with rage, my mom hovering behind him, eyes tight and defensive. They'd come ready to fight, ready to scream, ready to bully me into submission one last time. I stepped aside and let them in. This needed to end face to face once and for all. I was done hiding, done shrinking, done letting them rewrite history to suit their bitterness. They stormed into my living room, my dad's eyes sweeping the room like he was searching for something to criticize, something to invalidate. "This is ridiculous," he started immediately, his voice loud and booming. "You're destroying this family over a bedroom. A little bit of temporary help for your brother, and you're willing to burn every bridge we have." I closed the door and turned to face them, my voice quiet but unshakable, no trace of fear left. "This was never about a bedroom. This is about you resenting me for 10 years. This is about you being mad. Grandma chose to gift me money for my future, instead of letting you split it for your own benefit. This is about you teaching Liam to expect me to fix his mistakes forever." My mom opened her mouth to interrupt, but I kept going, cutting through her guilt trip before it could land. For the first time in my life, I spoke every unspoken truth I'd carried for decades. I worked 10 years for this house. 10 years of overtime, skipped holidays, no vacations, no luxuries. I helped your finances when your car broke down. I paid Liam's rent multiple times. I showed up for every family event, apologized for every perceived slight, and never once asked for anything in return. And when I finally build something for myself, you skip my biggest milestone, lie to the whole family, and demand I hand over my home to fix my brother's choices. I looked directly at my dad, holding his furious gaze without flinching. Grandma gave me that money because she saw how hard I fought. She saw no one was fighting for me. It was mine by gift, mine by right, mine by every hour of work I put in after it. "You have no claim to this house, no claim to my success, no claim to my peace," my dad sputtered, angry and lost without his usual guilt-based tactics. "We raised you! You owe us everything. You raised a child," I replied firmly. "I raised an adult. You provided a roof and food when I was small, and I've repaid that kindness 100 times over as an adult. But parenthood isn't a lifelong contract to own your child's success. It's not a license to exploit their hard work for your other child's comfort." My mom's facade cracked, her passive-aggressive composure breaking into raw, petty resentment. "You think you're so perfect now? So high and mighty with your nice house and your successful career? You've always been the difficult one, the ungrateful one." "I've always been the responsible one," I corrected her. "The one who sacrifices, the one who shows up, the one you take for granted until you need something. That's not ungrateful. That's exhausted." They had no rebuttal. No argument, no lie, no manipulation left to deploy. Every one of their claims had been dismantled. Every layer of their resentment laid bare for what it was. Petty, unfair, one-sided entitlement. They stood in my living room, defeated and furious, stripped of every moral high ground they'd pretended to hold. My dad's face turned red with impotent rage. "Fine," he bit out, his voice shaking. "If this is how you choose to be, then so be it. We're done. You're no longer part of this family." The words should have hurt. Once they would have shattered me completely, but in that moment, standing in the home I'd built alone, surrounded by the proof of my own strength, I only felt relief. I nodded slowly, calmly, finally free. "Okay," I said softly, "if that's what you need to do." They stormed out of my house seconds later, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled one final time. The sound echoed through the empty room, loud and final. The fight was over. The The conflict was resolved, but as the silence settled back over my home, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The days after the final confrontation were quiet, softer than I'd imagined. There were no more angry texts, no more ultimatums, no more family gossip swirling around me. My parents kept their word. They cut me off entirely. No calls, no messages, no attempts to reconcile. It was exactly the boundary I'd fought for, and yet it came with a quiet, bittersweet grief I hadn't expected. I grieved the childhood I'd wanted. I grieved the loving family I'd spent decades waiting for. I grieved the little girl who'd baked lemon tarts and cleaned houses and worked overtime just to earn a smile that never came. But I didn't grieve the family I actually had. I didn't miss the guilt, the exploitation, the endless one-sided sacrifice. I didn't miss shrinking small to make others feel comfortable. Liam texted me a few days later, a short, honest message. "I'm sorry. I'm figuring my life out on my own now. I don't expect anything from you. I just hope you're okay," I replied with kindness. No obligation, no pressure. We weren't close, not anymore, but we were no longer enemies. It was a small, peaceful middle ground I'd never thought possible. Extended family members continued to reach out, apologizing for believing the lies, thanking me for speaking the truth. Slowly, the judgment faded, replaced by understanding. People saw me not as the selfish daughter, but as the resilient survivor I'd always been. 1 week after my family walked out of my life, I decided to host a new housewarming, not for blood relatives who'd never celebrated me, for my chosen family, the people who'd loved me unconditionally, who'd stood by me through every hard day, who'd celebrated my wins without expecting anything in return. I invited Marnie, a few close friends, and my favorite cousin who'd always seen me clearly. The day of the gathering was bright and sunny, the Pacific Northwest rain finally clearing for warm golden light. I cleaned my dining room again, set the table for 5 once more, but this time, every seat was filled with people who wanted to be there. No empty chairs, no unmet expectations, no waiting for someone to choose me. I baked the lemon tart again that morning, following my grandmother's recipe exactly, zesting the lemons slow and careful, stirring the custard with gentle hands. This time I didn't bake it to make anyone love me. I baked it for me. For the little girl who'd once hoped for family warmth, for the woman who'd finally built her own joy, for the grandmother who'd believed in me before anyone else did. When my friends arrived, they walked through my doors with smiles and hugs, genuine excitement for my new home. They admired my floors, complimented my decor, sat at my table and laughed with me. They celebrated me, openly and freely, no strings attached, no hidden agendas. As I sat at my full dining table, eating the tart I'd made for myself, I thought back to that quiet, devastating Saturday night weeks before. I thought of the cold chicken, the deflated balloons, the empty chairs, the 5 dismissive words that had broken my last hope. I thought of how done I'd felt, how final that quiet lock-turning had been. That closing door hadn't just shut out my toxic family. It had opened a new life for me, one where my worth didn't depend on anyone else's approval, where my home was truly my safe space, where I got to define family for myself. This house was never built for them. It was built for the version of me that refused to give up, the me that worked 10 years alone, the me that set boundaries, the me that chose self-respect over toxic belonging, the me that finally got to be celebrated. The silver balloons were gone now, but the word home lived in every corner of this space, in the laughter of my friends, in the warmth of my sunlit rooms, in the quiet peace I'd fought so hard to earn. Home wasn't a family name or a blood tie. Home was where I was finally, unapologetically myself. I'd lost the family I'd spent my life trying to please, but I'd finally found myself. And for the first time in 34 years, that was more than enough.